50,000 people did not show up to an airport by accident. Think about that for a second. 50,000 people, organized, coordinated, waving flags, chanting in unison, some of them having traveled 6 hours by train just to stand in a terminal and hold up a sign, all of them converging on Paris Charles de Gaulle for one reason. Not for a World Cup trophy. Not for a farewell concert from a rock legend. Not for a state visit from a president or a king. Not for any of the things that the French public has been trained over generations to recognize as worthy of this kind of spectacle. For a 20-year-old girl from Quezon City holding a tennis racket. And here is the question that the entire French sporting world is now desperately, urgently trying to answer. Who is Alexandra Eala? How does a young woman from Southeast Asia, from a country that has never produced a professional tennis star at this level, arrive at an airport in Europe and receive a welcome that rivals a conquering hero? How did this happen? When did this happen? And why does it feel like the rest of the world is only just now catching up to something that 50,000 people already knew? Because what went down at that terminal was not in anyone's script. Certainly not the security teams who scrambled to upgrade crowd protocols not once, not twice, but 3 separate times in the hours before her flight landed, each upgrade insufficient, each new estimate still wildly wrong. Not the French journalists who showed up with their cameras and their notepads expecting a routine athlete arrival, a few sound bites, maybe a photograph of a young woman with a tennis bag smiling for the assembled press, and instead found themselves inside something they are still struggling to find words for. Not the local commuters and airport staff who stepped into Terminal 2 and walked directly into a wall of sound so overwhelming that you could feel it physically, in your chest, in your feet, in the glass of the terminal windows trembling from the pressure of 60,000 lungs singing the same name. The blue, the red, the yellow, everywhere you looked, flags stretching from the departure boards to the baggage carousels. Drums that turned the hard floors and concrete ceilings into a percussion hall. A coordinated choir of thousands chanting in a language that most of France had never heard deployed with this kind of collective force. And somewhere in the center of all of it, moving through the crowd with the quiet, unhurried calm of someone who had been preparing for exactly this moment her entire life, Alexandra Eala, smiling, pausing, looking at the faces around her, carrying no trace of the exhaustion that a long international flight should have carved into anyone. She looked like she belonged there. She looked like she had always belonged there. But to truly understand what that airport scene meant, to understand why French television anchors were stumbling over their words, why sports editors were scrapping their prepared content and starting over at midnight, why the entire conversation around this tournament changed the moment her plane touched down, you cannot stop at the surface. You cannot just point a camera at a crowd and say, "Look how many people came." You have to understand who those people are, and what this young woman represents to them, and the long winding road that brought all of them to the same terminal on the same night. Because this story did not begin this week. It began a long time ago, in a country that the Western sporting world has systematically underestimated for decades. Alexandra Eala grew up in the Philippines, which means she grew up understanding something about sport that no coaching manual has ever been able to fully teach. In the Philippines, sport is not recreation. It is not something you schedule between meetings or watch casually on a Sunday afternoon. Sport in that country carries a gravity that is almost theological. When a Filipino athlete steps onto an international stage, the entire nation leans forward as one body. The stakes are always larger than the scoreboard. Every match carries the accumulated hopes of 100 million people who see in their athletes a reflection of something they have been told to doubt, that they belong at the highest table, that they are good enough, that the world will one day have no choice but to acknowledge what they have always known about themselves. Alex Eala grew up breathing that air. She understood the weight before she understood the sport, and the weight was enormous, because she was choosing to compete in a game that had almost no infrastructure for her in her home country. No red clay training courts accessible to public programs. No national pipeline of coaches with Grand Slam credentials. No clear blueprint, no established path, no Filipino player who had gone before her to prove it was possible. Just her talent, which was obvious from the beginning, and her discipline, which people who worked with her early describe as extraordinary even by elite standards, and a family that looked at everything working against her and decided to believe in her anyway. But here is the thing about talent at that level. It does not stay hidden for long. The world finds it, eventually. And the world found Alexandra Eala. She earned a scholarship to the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Spain. Let the weight of that sentence settle. Not a local training program. Not a regional development camp. The Rafa Nadal Academy, one of the most selective and technically demanding tennis development environments on the planet, built around the philosophy and methodology of arguably the greatest clay court player the sport has ever produced. A girl from Quezon City walked into that program and earned her place there not as a novelty, not as a diversity initiative, not as someone who was given a chance out of goodwill. She earned it because her game demanded to be taken seriously. She did not arrive as a curiosity. She arrived as a competitor, and what she built inside those walls over the years that followed is a tennis game that is genuinely, technically frightening. She is left-handed, which in tennis is already a significant structural advantage. Left-handed players make up roughly 10% of the professional tour but account for a disproportionate number of Grand Slam champions, because their serve angles and spin patterns are unfamiliar in a way that never fully becomes routine to right-handed opponents. But Eala does not rely on the lefty advantage as a crutch. She weaponizes it as part of a larger tactical system. Her serve on the ad side pulls opponents so far beyond the singles line that the reply becomes nearly impossible to hit with quality. She follows it with a forehand that she hits with the kind of heavy topspin you develop when you have spent years training on clay, learning to construct points rather than simply trade shots. She plays a high-intelligence game. She is not a slugger looking to end rallies quickly through brute force. She is a constructor, someone who sees the geometry of the court, who understands how to build a point toward a conclusion that the opponent does not see coming until it is already over. That kind of tactical maturity is something coaches spend entire careers trying to develop in players. In Alexandra Eala, it arrived early, and it has only deepened. She is 20 years old. She plays like someone who has already lost 100 matches in Grand Slams and learned from every single one. Now here is where the story takes a turn that even the most seasoned tennis analysts did not anticipate, because the French establishment knew all of this. They had the scouting reports. They had watched the juniors circuit results. They knew her ranking, her serve speed, her win percentages on different surfaces. What they did not know, what they had profoundly and completely failed to account for, was what she means to the people who follow her. The French tennis world thought they were getting a talented young player with an enthusiastic fan base. What arrived at their airport was something categorically different. What arrived was a movement. And movements do not follow the same rules as fan bases. The phrase 50,000 Pinoys ready had been circulating in Filipino online communities for weeks before her arrival. In France, outside of the diaspora, it was dismissed as social media enthusiasm, the kind of hyperbolic fan language that sounds exciting online and then amounts to a few hundred people at the terminal with phone cameras. This was the first and most catastrophic miscalculation, because the Filipino diaspora in France is not a loosely connected collection of individuals who share a country of origin. It is a community, deeply organized, emotionally bonded, connected across dozens of regional WhatsApp groups and Facebook communities and Discord servers that have been active for years. These are people who already knew each other, who had already built the infrastructure of collective action. When the call went out, when the specific details began circulating about her flight, her arrival terminal, the date, the time, those networks activated with a speed and a coordination that French authorities were simply not equipped to model. Custom jerseys had been ordered and distributed weeks in advance. Flags, not homemade flags, but properly produced, full-color Philippine flags and Eala-branded banners, had been imported in bulk from suppliers across Europe. Caravans had been organized from the Filipino communities in Marseille, in Lyon, in Nice, in Bordeaux, in Strasbourg. Families who had not seen each other in months coordinated their schedules around this single event. Grandmothers made the journey. Young children were brought along not because their parents couldn't find childcare, but because their parents wanted them to be there, wanted them to see this, to feel this, to carry the memory of it. French security had prepared for perhaps 200 people, maybe 500 if they were being cautious. They got a crowd that, at its peak, rivaled the attendance at a domestic football match. They got something France had never seen directed at a single tennis player in the history of the sport, and the shock that rippled through the French media in the hours that followed was not the shallow shock of surprise. It was the deeper shock of a country confronting something it did not know existed within its own borders. France has always known it had a Filipino community. It had simply never been forced to reckon with the scale and the passion of it until those terminal doors opened and the noise hit. What happened next changed everything about how this tournament is being discussed. Think carefully about what it means for the matches ahead. Imagine being a French player, a player who has grown up hitting on red clay, who is trained in the French Federation system, who has watched Roland Garros from the stands as a child and dreamed of hearing that crowd cheer for them. You walk onto that court, your country, your surface, your crowd. And you look up at the stands, and the stands are yellow and blue. The section behind the baseline is chanting in Tagalog. The energy in the venue is not divided, it is overwhelmingly, physically, atmospherically pointed in one direction. Every winner she hits triggers a sound that you feel in your sternum. Every point you win is met with polite applause that is immediately swallowed by the anticipation of what she does next. Tennis is 90% mental. This is not a cliché. It is the most important technical truth in the sport. And the mental pressure of playing against 50,000 people who have decided, collectively, that today is not the day you win, that kind of pressure has ended careers. It has broken serves. It has turned technical leads into psychological collapses. For her opponents, the crowd alone is a weapon. For Alexandra Eala, it is oxygen. Go back and watch the arrival footage carefully, because there is something in it that tells you more about who she is than any statistics or match analysis ever could. She has just completed a long international flight. She has a tournament beginning in days that will demand everything she has. The rational, energy-conserving thing to do is to move quickly through the terminal, acknowledge the crowd with a wave, and get to the car. Instead, she stops. She takes her time. She looks, not in the scanning, performative way of someone playing to the cameras, but in the genuine, absorbing way of someone who is actually seeing the people in front of her. The grandmother holding the sign. The child in the Eala jersey who is too small to see over the crowd and is being lifted by her father. The overseas worker who has tears on his face and is trying to hold his flag steady. She sees them. She is not performing gratitude. She is feeling it. And there is a difference between those two things that crowds always know, even if they cannot articulate it. A performer gives you the gesture you expect. A real champion gives you the moment you did not know you needed. That is who Alexandra Eala is, and this is the point in the story where sport dissolves into something more fundamental, something that a scoreboard cannot contain. Many of the 50,000 people who showed up that night had not been home to the Philippines in years. In some cases, decades. They are the millions of Filipinos who built lives abroad, who left because the opportunities they needed did not exist at home, who sent money back every month, who celebrated Filipino holidays in apartments in Paris and Lyon and Nice, who kept the language alive in their households even as their children grew up speaking French in school. They are proud of the lives they have built, but they carry the distance. It is always there. When Alexandra Eala steps through those terminal doors, something happens to that distance. It does not disappear, but it collapses. Suddenly, home is right here. Home is in this terminal, in this sound, in this 20-year-old woman who walked out of the Philippines and into the most competitive sporting environment in the world and refused to disappear. When they cheer for her, they are cheering for the version of themselves that also left. For every risk they took, for every moment of doubt they pushed through in a foreign country. For their children who were born here and who need to see this, need to see a Filipino woman standing at the center of a moment this large and refusing to be diminished by it. Alex Eala is not just a tennis player to these people. She is proof. The French public, watching this unfold, has begun to understand something it did not know before she arrived. Not through a press release. Not through a cultural exchange program. Through a crowded terminal at 2 in the morning and the sound of 50,000 people loving one of their own with every piece of themselves. France has received what can only be described as a lesson in soft power, delivered not by any government or institution but by a community that simply showed up. The commercial world has already taken notice, and the speed of that attention has been remarkable. When you see 50,000 organized, passionate, brand-loyal consumers mobilizing around a single individual, you are not looking at a fan base. You are looking at a market that did not previously have a face in European sports. Luxury houses, sportswear giants, streaming platforms. Every major brand with a presence in France or an eye on the Asian market is now watching the same footage and having the same urgent internal conversation. The Eala effect is real. It has a number attached to it now, and that number is 50,000, and it showed up physically in person before she even hit a ball. But every bit of this, the cultural moment, the commercial attention, the soft power, the emotional significance, it all rests on one thing. It rests on what happens when she walks onto that clay court. Alexandra Eala is not famous because she is popular. She did not build this following through social media strategy or curated personal branding. She built it because she is excellent. Because people watched her play and understood, viscerally, that they were seeing something rare. The crowd at that airport is not performing support for someone they pity or someone they have adopted as a sentimental favorite. They are following a genuine competitor who has earned everything she has, who trained on the other side of the world from home, who climbed inside one of the most demanding athletic development systems ever built and came out the other side holding a game that frightens elite players. The French tennis establishment is now confronting the full reality of what has arrived. A left-handed player trained in the Nadal methodology, playing clay court tennis with the kind of structural intelligence that Nadal spent his career perfecting, backed by a crowd that will not let a match feel normal. The French pride themselves on their clay court tradition. They have produced champions on this surface for generations. And now they are looking at the draw and doing the quiet math of what it means to face this player, in this environment, with this crowd. The psychological edge that Eala carries into every match in France this month is not quantifiable. It does not show up in the statistics. It shows up in the silence between points, when an opponent bounces the ball before serving and hears the expectant hum of 50,000 people who are all breathing together, all waiting for the same thing, all absolutely certain of what they want to happen next. That silence is a weapon. And it belongs to her. As the tournament progresses and the matches begin, the story being told in Paris will be about more than wins and losses. It will be about whether a sport that has long been defined by tradition and geography is ready for what comes next. Because what comes next is this: athletes who emerge from countries that have never had a seat at the table, fan bases that travel across continents, communities that transform neutral venues into something that feels like home. The borders of global tennis are dissolving, and Alexandra Eala is not a symbol of that dissolution. She is its leading edge if she goes deep in this tournament, if she takes sets from top 20 players, if she closes out matches with that crowd behind her, if the image of her celebrating on clay in front of 50,000 screaming Filipinos becomes the image associated with this event, the sport will never look at Southeast Asia the same way again. The investment in tennis programs across the Philippines will accelerate. The young girls watching this on their phones at midnight will begin to believe something they could not quite let themselves believe before. And the next Alexandra Eala, whoever she is, wherever she is right now, will have a path that this one did not have. Will have proof that it can be done. That is the real stakes of this tournament. Not the ranking points. Not the prize money. The proof. And somewhere in a hotel room in Paris right now, Alex Eala is not thinking about any of this. She is not thinking about the legacy or the soft power or the commercial implications or the history being written around her. She is thinking about her serve. She is thinking about her movement on the clay, about her preparation for the lefty angles she is going to create tomorrow in practice. She is thinking about the specific tactical problems she wants to solve before her first match. Because that is the difference between a popular athlete and a champion. A popular athlete is aware of the moment. A champion is inside the work. She has always been inside the work. Since the first time she picked up a racket in Quezon City, through the years of training far from home in Manacor, through the junior circuit victories and the development of a game that no one quite knew how to categorize because it had been built from scratch in a country that had no template for it, she has always been inside the work. 50,000 people at an airport is not pressure to Alexandra Eala. It is not a burden. It is not a distraction. It is the world finally arriving at the conclusion she reached about herself a long time ago. The confirmation has come. Paris has felt it. The sport is beginning to process it. And in the days ahead, when the first ball is struck on clay and the crowd erupts and the opponents across the net feel the full weight of what they are walking into, the world is going to understand that the arrival at Charles de Gaulle was not the main event. It was only the opening act. The era has begun. And it does not stop here.